Now, we're going to get more into the finance part of it, and it's difficult to understand the finance if you don't understand the model. And there's some of these acronyms I can't even keep up with, because I'm not in the finance area. I don't teach project finance, one of my colleagues, but I'll do what I can. So as we get into these shareholder agreements, again, you begin to understand the role that finance plays. So in talking of governance, we talked about the SPV being this limited partnership shell company. So it has to have a board of directors who will meet and deal with the governance of this asset. And that board will have some advisors that will advise it. And then there is the question of the voting rights within this board, because on the board you're going to have the various partners, participants, etc. And then there's the question of what's a majority, what's a super majority, and what requires unanimous voting. So just like any business, it's a limited partnership. This is when we come back to just a standard business arrangement and how you set up your rules of governance. You also have to then decide on your accounting and reporting obligations for the SPV. And then you look at the whole question of your equity commitment. Equity, if you know, as in real estate, the equity holders take all the risk in the sense, and so they want big returns. So once your contracts are in place on debt, any call on capital is then back to your equity. So you look at the structure of the equity commitment, when the money goes in, when they get it out, in what form they get it. You look at what happens if you need further capital contributions in the deal, and you look at the whole pricing of the equity. How much am I going to pay people for every dollar they give me? I won't go into all this, but there's a huge complexity of transferring your rights, your financial rights.
Our students understand right to first office, right to first refusal, but they've never seen
tags and drags.
Before.
Yeah. These, and I'm not even going to attempt it, but these are conditions that come with selling or transferring the bonds. Let's say someone sells their bond for a good price, and I think what happens is they have to share some of that goodwill with the others, because they have gained that by virtue of the contribution of everyone. So I think these tags and drags are things that get tagged on as conditions of transfer. The question would be approval of new shareholders. I mean, 407 Highway, Cintas out of Spain sold their interest, and it was taken up by the Canadian Pension Plan Board, and then the operator at the time was SNC-Lavalin. They dropped down into a 10%. So these things change over time, and then the question would be, might we take this and do an IPO?
Just so it's clear in my mind, this is shareholder issues in the special purpose vehicle.
Yes.
Is this governed by the, are these provisions governed by the agreement?
The master agreement.
This is all within the special purpose vehicle, or does the master agreement say how this?
They would all be full. I believe they're all folded into the master agreement, because in accepting the bid, the government's going to want to know all these things, because their interest is going to be keeping the project whole, so to speak, and their interest is going to be, if you guys are going to do this, don't think that you can escape by selling out, leaving us holding the bag.
So there very well may be an approved set of documents already on the shelf be used.
Yeah.
We'll modify it now.
Yeah. And then you've got the issue of minority right holders, and you've got the issue of shareholders and supplier issues, what role they play. Like, you know, if you've got Johnson Control committed for 30 years, what right do they have in some of these administrative decisions? So coming back to the point you just made, this is a bit of a follow-up. To deliver this, these are just some of the legal agreements. You need a truck for these things. So the project agreement is the primary contract between the public and the private sector. It defines the scope, the price, the timetable, service levels, and the payment mechanism. So it's the omnibus agreement. Then you have what we call the drop-down contracts, the design build and the service and operation. Then you have the financial agreements between the shareholders and the lenders. So all of these, so you can see that there's about 6 to 8 feet of legal contracts that define the project scope and risk allocation. Now imagine doing this for every project separately without, you know, starting from scratch. The lawyers would love it. And as I say, I saw about a year or two ago, I saw that a law firm in Chicago had been hired by the state of Michigan to draft up a PPP model. And I thought, man, I can tell you what it's going to be like. It's going to have a lot of legal work. And so the project agreement is the primary agreement between the public and private sector. And then, as I indicated, you've got your drop-down agreements. So you do need contracts. So, first of all, under traditional procurement, you can outsource operation and maintenance. So you may outsource people, but they're, in a sense, when you outsource them, that's not what we're talking about here. That's just simply an outsourcing agreement. So you outsource cleaning, you outsource, you could outsource all sorts of things in the building. And it's very traditional for governments now to outsource a lot of maintenance and operation work on a lot of basis. But these people come in and of course the first thing they say is, why did you put in such crappy equipment? It's hard for us to maintain your HVAC because you're using crappy equipment. You say, well, you know, we did, quote, value engineering. And we were told that we really didn't need to have, you know, a million, you know, air conditioning, whatever the BTU load. And so what, of course, in a traditional model is that the price of value engineering can often come back to haunt you. And then when you outsource the contract, they're saying, we're going to have to replace some of this equipment within 5 years. And so, and the problem is that under the traditional, there are no tools and incentives to deal with design risk, the construction scheduling. So if you're late, you're late. What are you going to do? Penalize me? Operating costs. So all of these risks really are difficult to manage under a traditional procurement. And so essentially the PPP contract defines a fixed price and service level over the long term. So there's one price for building it and operating it, one price. They're all taken back on a PV calculation. And so, of course, what happens is this is the way the government sees it. They put a lot of money into CapEx, and then they just have to sort of, you know, pay an amount of money annually. And now and again, they have to replace the mechanical and, you know, electrical systems. Of course, what happens is that this is more what happens in the traditional model. They end up spending more, and they end up taking longer, and lo and behold, they really, they end up having to spend more money because they don't fix it till it breaks. And then, at the end, to bring it back to its condition, they have to pour in piles of money at some point to bring the building back into operation, because this is what we would call deferred maintenance costs. And so, and what they normally do is that the planned expectation begins to diminish over time. That the building, the day it's built, it starts to go downhill. So, if we look at construction, that at financial close, the money is available, and the interest clock starts going. So you can imagine on $1.5 billion how much that interest is per day. So any day, for every day that contractor is late, that interest is, the additional interest cost is his responsibility, or hers. So you have to remember that in this method of financing, the funds are available day one. Now, you may not draw them down, but they're 100% of the funds are available. Now, the construction period concludes upon substantial completion. Do people know what the term substantial completion is?
Maybe you should define it.
Pardon?
Maybe
Define?
you should define it for us.
Okay. In architecture and construction terms, we have to determine when a building is finished. And we use the term substantial completion. And that means that you go through, it's the point at which you go, the architect and the developer and the owner and so forth walk through the building, and different locales call it different things. Deficiency list, punch list. So what you do at substantial completion, you go through the building and you list all the deficiencies, and then the contractor has usually 1 year from, normally 1 year, I'm sorry, it's got a 1 year warranty, and then there's timing for when these deficiencies have to be addressed. So substantial completion, it doesn't mean it's 100% complete, it means it's substantially complete, subject to removing the deficiencies. Like you might come in and say, this isn't the carpet we ordered. This is a poor quality, that is not what we spec. And then you go through and you say, this is not the ceiling that we specified. You've got 30 days or whatever. So substantial completion is a point at which essentially the service can start being delivered. You use the same term here, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of times it's triggered off of, for an office building example, when you get your use and occupancy permit from the government.
Yeah.
Then that kind of triggers the, okay, now we've got a real building. We can, one of the things from the contractor side is substantial completion, they get the rest of their money.
That's it. Very good point. That's correct.
They're not necessarily the same. The occupancy permit is not necessarily the same as substantial completion.
That's true. It's substantial completion is negotiated, but a lot of times it hovers around the occupancy, because that's a clear deadline that everybody can agree on.
And the problem with the occupancy permit is that it can be done in stages.
Right.
For example, we will inhabit the first few floors of a building and still be building the top of the building. I don't know if you do that here.
Not occasionally.
There was a building sold, there was a new office building done by Brookfield in downtown Toronto, and the prime tenant was PwC. And their requirement was that they occupy the top 20 floors by this date. And so the contractor had to figure out, okay, how do I get the top 20 floors occupied while I'm building the bottom 60 floors?
Here we don't have 20-story buildings. High limitation, we only stop at 10.
Yeah.
So we don't have that problem.
Yeah, so we'll go up to, now we're building condos up to 80, we're building office up to 80. And so you can't, when you're building 650 units, you've got to begin to occupy those units early on. So, but I think that the people who are going to keep their eye on the ball on substantial completion are your financiers, because the money begins to then flow. And the contractor is entitled to a payment subject to holdback. You know, that's a whole technical side. We have what we call a Mechanic Lien Act, where you have to hold back 10% for any claims by subcontractors, etc. Construction phase is financed by debt and equity from the SPV. And the construction period is typically 2 to 5 years. And I'll come back and discuss it because it's the same money. We don't have construction debt and financing. It's one pool of money. Going back to the governance now. So here's your SPV. Here's your project board. The government may have its own board overseeing it. You've got the government usually has a project leader who is overseeing the project agreement and reporting to this group up here. Then the project board has got to have support in human resources, in legal, commercial, project finance, shareholder agreements, financial administration, and technical. That's your governance. Then you've got loan agreements that they have to monitor with the lenders, and then they've got a construction contract that would end essentially at, you know, a year after substantial. Now, you have to remember too that some of these guarantees, warranties, would go on more than a year. You might get 5 or 10 years on some of your systems. And then you've got an FM contract here. So this is a numbered company, and you can see its functions ongoing. This, by the way, is not a Canadian thing. This is, you know, standard international. We use whatever is working. You know, we don't try and invent the wheel. So here's the roles and responsibilities of the SPV. So they manage any contact with government is done through the SPV. The operations, the contractor doesn't go. They have one spokesperson. They oversee all the contractual agreements. They manage all the lenders, the bondholders, the banks, the rating agencies. And then they have to integrate everybody. So they have to make sure that all the parts are working, and they do the processing payment. I think we'll find out what LTA means. I forget. There's so many acronyms now in the industry, I can never follow them.